Yeah, so Rick Sterling from Western IM, and thanks everybody for showing up today. Really appreciate it. And Ken, thank you very much for coming back to our fourth and last session of this round for AI, talking about AI and for RIM. Um, uh, Interestingly enough, there had been a lot of discussion, and there continues to be daily discussion in a whole lot of sectors, as you said, Ken, like OpenText and other people about AI and doing artificial intelligence around jobs in an organization. One thing I do hear quite a bit still is using chat GPT. People talk about the negative parts of using chat GPT in an organization because you're actually putting things into the large language model in that case. So being very careful about what goes in and what's being said and who's putting it in and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I get all that for sure. Just as a precursor to this discussion, we don't do that. It goes in through the API in our case, so we don't think about the other side of that as all. It's safe. It goes in as through the API, and no input, no output gets used in the large language model that way. Anyway,
Maybe I'll
thanks.
jump. Can I just say something about
Sure, go
that?
ahead. Yep.
I'm actually doing some work with the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner of BC, and I was talking with them about the potential of using a large language model to do auto classification and to do a cleanup, because they're almost at the point where they need to do an implementation. And they said, well, no, we can't do that because we can't have our information going into like this chat GPT, exactly what you just said. And I said, no, we've built a firewall. There's an API that prevents all that from happening. And as soon as I said that, they went, you know what? This may be the real solution to a lot of stuff. And that was from the Office of Information and Privacy Commissioner. That's their one concern, is that privacy confidentiality thing. And if you got that solved, Bob's your uncle.
Thank goodness you were there, Ken, to kind of answer that for them in that situation, because otherwise nobody would know, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, unless you're deep up to your neck in a lot of the stuff, you wouldn't really know that.
Yeah.
Put the pieces together. I guess I just wanted to thank everybody for putting in results of putting the survey information in for us, so we could look at the survey information from the surveys we sent out. And my apologies to everybody that we actually had a link that didn't work in the registration for the session, and Brian had been on holidays, and he actually did a new message to everybody from Puerto Vallarta, actually. So at least he was still on the internet to do that. Thanks to everybody for that. Just wanted to kind of go with the questions, I guess, and kind of discuss the stuff after that, if everybody's okay with that.
Yeah, what I'll do, Rick, is I'll kind of read each question, and then I don't know if you want to follow up. I've got some notes I've taken from the results as well, but
sure. Well, we could come at that from both sides, Troy. You want to say your piece, and then I'll maybe add to that as well.
Okay. So we'll just start with one. There's only 10 questions here. So just starting kind of at the top. Has there been any corporate discussion about AI in your organization, and by which department? Kind of just to summarize with some of the results that we've got, there was a varying level of kind of discussion that was happening. The one kind of department that was particularly pointed out was legal. Obviously came up in terms of using some of these AI tools.
Right.
But then there was also the other end of the spectrum where there was no discussion or unaware of any kind of discussion that was happening. So as kind of part of the results, that's what I saw.
Yeah, it was in regards to the legal side. Like I did a speaking engagement in one of the provinces, Western provinces, over the last 6 weeks actually, for a group of credit unions. And one of the sessions that they had, I did my session. It wasn't about AI in that case; it was about some other things, but. There was a lawyer there from one of the large firms in Western Canada that did a session on AI actually at that particular function, and she was very good at discussing all those things that could be negative related to Chat GPT, which is what I talked about in the first place, and even stuff I hadn't thought of either, because I don't really think too much about that. I don't use it. I don't put corporate information into it. I don't do any of that anyway, because I know better than to do that. But she did a very good presentation on what the negatives might be on that side and the legal side. But I didn't expect anybody to, I didn't really think anybody would say that there had been a lot of corporate discussion about AI. But I think it might be early in some of the corporate side of things to talk about that. So I wasn't surprised at all by the fact that most people said no, there's that they are aware of. There's been no discussion about AI.
That kind of leads to the second part and the whole idea of question was, has your organization thought about creating a corporate AI policy? And yeah, the kind of consensus is that no one's there yet. There hasn't really been anybody strongly moving in that and actually getting something developed as a policy for AI.
And again, Ken, we talked a little bit about that. You and I talked a little bit about that as well, as I think although it's early in the game, I think it will be important for us to think about that, to start to get ahead of that, ahead of the curve a little bit on that, to make sure that we have our thoughts straight about what a policy might look like in an organization. Because if there's going to be AI, which we know there all is, and people are going to use it, which we're sure that's going to happen, we should probably be able to at least let our corporate staff know, our people know that what they should and shouldn't do in regards to the AI. I mean, it just makes sense to me that we should be doing that.
And we've basically already came up with one policy statement. Thou shalt not put personal information or confidential information into the AI.
ChatGPT, yeah.
So the wrench that I'll throw into here that I think a lot of people aren't thinking far enough ahead on is that, sure, there are tools out there like ChatGPT and things like that, but what happens when Windows by default has a button, or your right-hand part of your Windows screen literally has the AI chatbot in Windows? Not just, hey, you're going to go somewhere and use something like ChatGPT, but I opened up Word and asked it to write a financial report for me based off of this document. It's not just that, hey, we got to govern or put policies in place for people going out and using tools. What happens when it is embedded in everything we use on a daily basis?
Really good point, Troy. Thanks for bringing that up. We should just say as a throw this out that Microsoft, although it's a preview right now to have the AI in there now in Edge and some other Microsoft applications, they are going to be charging for the use of that in future. They're going to charge like $30 a user approximately for the use of the AI in amongst their other tools. So eventually you're not going to be able to just go use it. You may have some little small pieces you can use, but the actual use of that AI will cost $30 per user per month to make that fly right. So they're going to make quite a bit of money on that when the time comes. So again, back to the policy statement again. Thanks, Troy, for bringing us there. But back to the policy statement, I really want to be able to say, okay, when this happens, when we are going to use this AI in course of our daily operation, here's what you're not going to be doing with that AI. And I think it's important to get ahead of the curve, like I said, with a lot of your employees. I think it's really important to do that.
And again, it's going to be becoming increasingly more difficult because there are AI tools that we use already on a daily basis, suggestions when you type into search boxes. Right. Like even the default search results on Edge comes back with some AI generated content in some of the responses. So there will be a case where the fine line between when we're using it and when we're not. And I think that's when we start getting into the whole, societal policies when it comes to AI, governmental policies in terms of knowing when you're using an AI agent and when you're not. This AI agent idea is becoming very, very prevalent. Obviously, the last OpenAI Dev Day, people are already building before. I had my own kind of version of it. They're getting to the point where my 30,000 email inbox was being able to be put into an agent. So there's a lot of stuff coming, and we got to be aware not just how we're going to govern that going forward in terms of policy, but more of a societal thing when it comes to it's going to be in everything, and how do we manage that when it comes to, you know, our organizations.
Yeah, as a sticking a stick in the sand a little bit too is Microsoft runs what they call Patch Tuesday once a month. The second Tuesday of every month is when the updates occur in Microsoft. They call it Patch Tuesday. So the second Tuesday of the month is Patch Tuesday with Microsoft. And we're still getting, at least I'm still getting 22H2 updates of my Microsoft applications. Waiting for 23H2 to come through as an update to 22H2, and 23H2 will have a lot of those kind of UI, AI kind of things in it when that occurs. So it will be a bit of a learning curve at that point for everybody. They're slowly bringing some of those things in, but 23U2 will be the update that has a lot of those things in place.
I will tell you, as of this morning, I have the Copilot button on my Windows taskbar now that opens the Copilot in
Yeah.
Windows. Yeah.
Me
right.
too.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, let's go. Maybe we'll keep moving through the questions here.
Sure, sure.
Number 3, do you think AI will change how you currently perform RIM functions in your organization? So a lot of people are saying yes. Obviously, it's going to be affecting a lot of stuff, including RIM and things we're performing in the RIM functions. With one person actually being very convinced of the AI value and the security. So I know some of the responses indicated back to our previous sessions, helping on kind of, and we mentioned at the beginning of this, the reinforcing the idea of how can we use these in terms of keeping our wall between our data and the large language models. There seems to be a little bit more consensus or lean towards some of the safety components of the AI systems. So that being said, they getting to that point will open up RIM being able to be performed by more AI kind of functionality.
So, kind of a follow-up question is to that is, when do we see that in the immediate future? Is this like 3 or 4 years down the line, or is it farther out, like 10 years?
Well, in the past month, I've probably done a half dozen demos where I'm showing reorganization happening, classification and disposition happening based off of AI decisions being made. Now, I will say a lot of the tools we talked about earlier already, that a lot of these tools are generative AIs, you know, generating content and stuff for us, but they're not doing things like making a decision on a document or moving a document. So there's some work processes with some, like what I'm building into our tools, that actually does the work and not just uses AI generative tools to generate content, but how can we have it make decisions that then perform actions? That's going to take some time to catch up. I think with what we built at Western IM is kind of ahead a little bit, not to toot our own horn, but that idea of actually getting work done is the next step on what we do with these systems, not just how is it going to generate content for us, or how we're going to use it to make decisions, but then the result of those decisions actually doing some kind of action. Working with clients, people having use cases and implementing those, that's what we need to get to. And that's what we're trying to do with a lot of our clients right now is what is the action you're trying to perform, and how can we have the AI agent make a decision and then our tools actually perform the action.
I think that's an important kind of concept there, Troy, is what we're talking about here is not just some magical AI that's going to automatically twitch its nose and have it do a bunch of work for you. There needs to be something there behind the scenes that, I mean, we already had a tool. Fortunately for us, we already had a tool that did all this stuff, albeit manually or possibly in a manual kind of way. And the only addition here is using the AI to make it, you know, do a bunch of work fast that we could never do in a manual, passive kind of way, in a rational kind of way. So it's like you're also using an AI to make some things happen. But I think personally that my sense is we couldn't do it anyway. A lot of these jobs and use cases we're talking about, impossible manually to do, impossible, unless you had so much money and so many people to try and make the project happen that it would be not feasible. Senior management people would never foot the bill for a lot of this stuff in a manual way to make it happen. So I don't think there's any other way than automating processes now to actually make a lot of these jobs happen. I don't know, Ken, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, doing an implementation job, for example, I mentioned the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner. They're really a relatively small organization. So to bring in a human being and work with them to go through is doable. It'd probably take about 6 to 9 months with a dedicated contractor and internal resources. So I mean that's not an insignificant amount of time and interruption to the service and all that sort of stuff. If you could bring in an AI and have it done in a week, obviously that's far more palatable for everybody. And then it scales up. So once we start looking at a medium-sized organization, you start seeing returns, because those kinds of projects now stretch not months, but years. Even for, I'm just talking about a medium-sized organization. And what I have seen all too many times is those projects at the medium-sized level, leadership changes, and they go, why are we spending money on this?
Sure.
Why do we have 2 or 3 people working on this almost full time? We need this stuff done. And they pull them off the project, and you have a half-done project, which is an absolute nightmare in records management.
Troy and I are both chuckling because we've seen it so many times too, Ken. It's just a pretty consistent
It's
thing.
a nightmare. Yeah.
Yeah. And it really, my sense right now is we're talking weeks and months, not months and years to get a project done. So it's just going to be a huge benefit to everybody to try and get these things done.
Yeah.
But I don't think they fly anymore.
Yeah. But we do have what I call the creme brulee effect. What Troy mentioned is we got to get some use cases. We got to break through that crust before we can get to the soft, yummy custard. So that's got to happen. And the sooner that happens, the sooner everything else will start rolling out.
Right. No, I would agree.
Okay, we'll keep moving here. Number 4, this one shifts a little bit. Indicate, this is for people taking the survey, indicate if you currently are doing research on your own about AI and any useful links that you can share. So a couple of responses in terms of this is that people generally are kind of aware of it, but haven't done much more than maybe a webinar or just online resources. The extent of the kind of ready, nobody really had the sense of, okay, I'm AI expert and can use this to get everything done that I need to get done. But people are trying to find the resources in general to kind of get at least started. And a couple of mentions towards our previous sessions as well came out of the responses.
Yeah, and one new use case, which we'll talk about later a little bit, was we had someone talk about the fact that their department's being split, and it's going. Their department is going to a private side. So I hadn't really thought about that whole idea of like the old days when the government changed and everybody wanted to change the name of a department from one thing to another, and they split up the kind of mandate for the department. Then the records ended up needing to be split. So that brought up that whole other use case of how do you actually take a bunch of records in an organization and split them into whatever number of pieces you needed to based on this thing that's happening. And Ken then just before we started today was talking about, and thanks Ken, because that's really true, M&A, any M&A things that happen, you end up getting records from the organization you acquired, and they're usually nothing like yours that you get. They're a mess. And they come in, and how do you actually make that stuff look like your kind of records to get them kind of integrated with your own record keeping system?
M&A, does that stand for mergers and amalgamations?
Mergers and acquisitions, Ken, sorry.
Acquisitions, there we go.
Mergers and acquisitions. That's legal legal jargon, M&A. They always talk about M&A.
Okay.
Yeah, mergers and acquisitions. Sorry, even we use buzzwords too much, don't we?
Yep.
So again, a bunch of use cases that I hadn't really thought about before. So that was, I think, really important.
Yep. We've seen it a lot, even in the physical world. We're still managing physical record mergers. It's happened a couple of times for our clients. Yep. Okay, let's keep going here. So number 5 here, are your classification structures and scope notes current and AI ready for, and would a future classification presentation be interest to you? Well, we'll probably touch on this again. We've done classification. I think 2 years ago, one of our main series during the Learn With Us was classification, what that means, how to organize things. It was very well done. Very similar to this series where we started out. I think Daryl did the first one in that series as well, with an introduction to classification, how things are organized, complexity. It was really good, very well done. But now that we're kind of getting to this point where we're using things like the AI tools to handle some of that decision making in organizations and classifications, that we'll probably want to revisit that with a new classification series. But in general, most people feeling that their scope notes are not ready for it. I made a comment before we started the session again too, that I'm really feeling like it's come up a lot, this idea, okay, when you're going to do records classification as part of exercise with the AI tools, is your AI classification ready? And I've kind of shifted my thinking in that in most cases that classifications in general are not ready, because even today we couldn't hand it to somebody and they could make decisions on records classification within an organization. And it has nothing to do with AI or anything, but just in general, the idea of reading and taking a classification and applying that to a record in your organization, how well can anybody do that? And it's outside the scope of even just the AI conversation. Most people aren't there. And what do we do to help that is probably where we want to start when we start looking at classification again, in my opinion. But
yeah, I mean, I'm not really a practitioner, so I always bow to Ken and the kind of high level practitioners that kind of do this kind of stuff for a living. And I can tell you that when I look at a lot of classification systems, so I look at a lot of them over a period of time, and I look at some of them, I go, how the heck would any human being actually understand where things should go in this classification system? Like, I couldn't do it. I'd need weeks of high level training to even be able to use the thing. So Ken, what do you think?
I'm so I those who know me know that I work in broad functional or big bucket classification systems. I hate the term big bucket. That's okay. And those things always come down to function. So what is the function of the document? So I've actually written some kind of almost like a workflow as to, you need to identify what the function of the document is, but then you need to explain what the word function means. And then you explain what the subject of that function is. So if you have budgeting, you need to be able to recognize that that's a type of plan and that it's a financial plan. So some of those concepts aren't immediately apparent, even to humans. So somehow a workflow that says, what is the function of this document? What is the subject of this document? Does it belong in this classification? And then do we need to make a new file folder for it? That sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Where does it need to be assembled? I think assuming that the classification system is built to work that way, because like you mentioned, Rick, I was actually just looking at one yesterday. It's not built that way. It's built subject, here's a function, here's a subject. This is an activity. We've even got ones for transactions actually built into the classification. It's so granular that it's not useful as a classification system. And even a human brain looks at it and goes, well, I don't know where my agreement goes. because it's in 5 different places. So it's got to be simplified, and it's got to follow as much as possible, because no classification system can purely follow function because of legislation and business needs and things like this. But as close as we can get, and then there'll be a few exceptions, that will make the AI not go crazy.
Right. Yeah, no,
Because,
very, very important. I guess important for sure. And we all know that. I mean, if you put, and I know this because one of our colleagues used to be the records manager for the federal government of Canada in Ottawa, and what he told me was that he had 5 classifiers working for him. This is in the paper days, of course, and those 5 classifiers would all take the same document and potentially put it in 5 different places.
Yeah.
These are professional classifiers. So if that's the case, it's not an exact science.
Yeah.
Well, even just internally too, what I've been doing more to what Ken was talking about here, where I'll actually start demos saying, here is the classification document, no software tools, nothing to do with Western IM, nothing. This is a software or a classification document, and here is our record in your organization. Now, what do we do with it? And how do we get from this to performing an action like disposition on this record? And that's what I've been very much trying to instill in people, is that this is where we're starting, this classification. All this other fancy tools, AI, software, professional services, all that kind of stuff doesn't matter if we can't take this document and this record and make a decision. So it's been very enlightening, and I think it drives people to start thinking that I'm making a decision based off of this information, and that's what we're trying to kind of do with these AI systems as well.
Yeah. I think this is an important concept as part of this discussion, is that whole idea of there's no magic in AI. There has to be something, something has to work in a manual kind of way in order for us to actually add that automation to it and make it fly right.
Yeah. I can take the times tables with 1 and 10 across the top and 1 and 10 across the bottom and find 7 times 7, just like a calculator can do it, right? And it's that classification document is your matrix of times tables that you're making your decision on to get your 49 out the other side when you hit 7 times 7 in the calculator. The same thing we want to happen with our AI systems based off of that. Yep.
So let me say that probably means, after this discussion we just had, that it would probably be good to do that classification, do another classification run in our Learn With Us sessions again. Ken, would you be interested in taking part in that?
Oh yeah, we can figure something out for that.
Okay, great. I just want to put Ken on the spot while he's right here in front of me. Next question.
Yeah, number 6. So from discussions in this session so far, what use cases do you think would be the most useful or most helpful at this time in your organization, i.e. shared drive cleanup? We will be discussing cases in future sessions as well. So the main 2 things that came out were shared drive cleanup and auto classification were kind of the common themes to the answer to this question, with a lot of people obviously making the notes that we're trying to go to M365. So what can we do kind of as on the way through to facilitate that process as well? So Ken just said it in chat here, garbage in, garbage out. How can we clean up some of that garbage as part of some of this process so that when we're getting the out, it isn't garbage that we just put in from our shared drives, for example. Other suggestions include digitization. Actually just recently did a demo scanning operation where they're literally getting the TIFF files out and then having manual processes to get them converted to PDFs and OCR'd, and then how do we index these documents, and then how do we provide more value to the output of our scanning process. And we had a great demonstration with them to show, like, here's your TIFF files, this is what's coming in, here's your client's classification, they need to know document states and document dates, and all this information's in these documents. How can we kind of get that out? So digitization and assisting with that was a big one. And that came along with the assigning metadata and classifications. And then this is where, during this question, is where Rick, you came up, pointed out earlier, context of splitting departments and transitioning to a private business. So those were kind of the main outcomes of this question.
Yeah, it's come up quite often in my career, 25 years in records and information management, quite a few times when it was just almost impossible. It went, how do we even do this? How do we split up the records? And and do it. I just want to go back to that digitization thing a little bit again. And Ken and I had a bit of a discussion about this maybe last time or just offline at one point, where we both seen clients that went out and they scanned a bunch of stuff and they didn't index it at all. They didn't index, they didn't do quality control, they didn't do anything. And they had a bunch of documents that were called VX993-1 or -2-3-4 in a big jumbled shared drive somewhere. And there was no way that anybody was ever going to make sense of that, that whole bunch of documents. What a great tool this would be, or a great way to be able to go in and say, point it at all those documents and go, okay, look at the documents and classify them for me, because there's no way to do that manually unless you look at each and every document.
And lots of times they're not even OCR'd to begin with. So you got to start with that.
There you go. Yeah.
Then do a crawl of them. And it's just trying to get a couple of human beings to come in and do that is just,
yeah,
that's not going to happen.
Forget it. Nobody's ever going to fund that one.
No.
So
there was another use case that I thought about, and this is probably about 15 years ago in my area. There was this push to try to include security levels into the classification system.
Right.
And every time I tried to do that, it just fell apart. And especially with broad functional classifications, because one category can hold multiple different levels of security.
Right.
But now, if we're doing a crawl, I think that it would be reasonably easy, I'm assuming, to assign a security level at the end of the process to a document or a file folder. So here's another thing where, rather than having a human being crawling through the file folders going, well, what security level is this?
Right.
We've got a much faster and more reliable, hopefully more reliable process to follow up with.
That same question, I might add, Ken, came up with 2 different provincial governments in the last couple of months.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was kind of an offhand topic of discussion. Like, do you think this thing you guys have, do you think that would actually be able to do security classification? And you know what, as long as you can give me a roadmap to what that looks like.
Yes.
Right? Tell me what that means to you and how that would happen, then we can probably do that too. Because a lot of, I mean, going from a shared drive to SharePoint, like totally different alien life forms, right? Trying to make some of these things happen would be a pretty difficult task. Sensitivity label, right, Troy?
Yeah.
Create a sensitivity label in some way, shape, or form in SharePoint for a particular classification would be a tricky thing, I think. Manually, it would be impossible, somewhat impossible.
And again, that whatever kind of rules that you're using to determine your levels of security need to be very clear, very simple, very understandable. No overlaps, no gaps.
Kind of like that discussion about classification system, same kind of discussion, right?
Exactly.
A human being needs to be able to figure it out first of all, and if they can't, then maybe the AI can't either.
Yeah.
As one of the exercises that we often do is not just a records classification, but is something like activity or some other category of information that's different than your records classification, where we want to associate things with, we have a finance records classification, but we also have project numbers, or we also have security levels, or we have leases. So we have documents that are supposed to be associated with leases. It's not just a records classification. And I try to bring this up at least once every time we have this conversation with clients and potential clients, is that you don't necessarily have to think about records classification being what you're putting your documents into. Is what other list of information does that record be associated with? And one of those comes up is, what do you do as an organization? We have a municipality that does land management. They have leases, they have licenses, they have all that kind of information, sales, and they get an email in which one of those is associated with, and then which particular lease and which property is associated with. So I've got a list of properties.
Documentation, Troy.
Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a strict kind of records classification in the processes associated with that. It could be business process stuff as well.
So that's this is touching on one of the questions I was going to ask you, Troy, and that is, There are legitimate times when a document comes in and it actually belongs in two file folders.
Yep.
So for example, over to finance for accounts receivable or accounts payable, and then over into a project file to prove that a step has been taken in a project.
Yep.
So how do you handle that in this process?
So it's tough when you're dealing with things like a shared drive, where it's very much a folder driven, you put it in this folder and that's where it goes. We like to use systems like in our Agile IM, or with the use of things like views or metadata associated with it in things like SharePoint, or other systems like a Documentum that does allow you to link it to two different locations, where we separate out a folder structure to metadata levels that allow us to view the data in different ways. It is one document that's associated with a lease and one document that's associated with a fiscal year financial report. It's got to be in both, but how do we give it the information to associate it with one and with the other? And that's where things like, I don't think people use SharePoint very well, in that sense that everybody goes from shared drive to SharePoint site and just puts it back in the same folder structure, where we want to start utilizing things like views and other systems that allow us to kind of associate with two different things without it actually living in two different places. So that's more of a system architectural kind of thing, outside of the idea of the AI kind of discussion. But how do we architect our systems to facilitate that and use the right systems for that more than anything?
Did they
I'll
answer
have
the
to think
question,
about
Ken?
Yeah, I could see that it's great if you've got an EDRMS. But yeah, if you're living in a SharePoint or shared drive, I know you can do it in SharePoint, but I'm still dealing with humans looking at a file folder. Yeah.
So let me ask the question, Troy. What would happen if we said to a system, okay, if it's this classification specifically here, that if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, I want you to put it in each of these two places. I want you to put it here, a copy here, and a copy there. So the same document goes in both places with different retention classification. Same classification.
Yeah, nothing's stopping you from using folder structures in the traditional way, where you do put the file in two places. We can have a view, so like with our tool, when we're doing like a migration project, we'll have two different views of the data. And if we're going into a system that the document needs to be in both locations, we export to both locations. But what we want to try to do is only, as best practices in records management, we really only want one version of that record, in some cases where it makes sense to have only one version of that record. Now, obviously, it's got to be retained for 7 years over here and 8 years over here. Let's not put two retentions on it. Let's manage it so finance has it for 7 years and the project folder has it for 10 years. They're two different cases. We want to keep them for both, and the people in those to be managed as the people in that kind of records sphere. But there's also the other way where we do only have the one record. So it's facilitating business operations, making the most out of what ERMS you're using. And in some cases, what we like to do, especially with our Agile IM tool, is a passive approach where the ERMS systems or the shared drives only house documents, and all that other information associated with records and disposition and what project it's associated with are different views of the data outside the shared drive in that case. So we can see a folder structure that's organizational based and a folder structure that's records management based, but there still is only one document out in the shared drive that we reference in both structures. Yep.
Right.
So bottom line is you got to look at what project you're doing and how it has to fit together. We're sorry, everybody, we're in the weeds a little bit here because we've all been in these weeds before, I guess, all of us. So we're kind of in the weeds. Sorry about that.
The most successful implementations when this happens in organizations that I've found has been that you do not apply two retentions to one document. You have other processes, whether it is in two places, it's referenced once. Right. How do we manage to it's the same thing in security. If we have two different security levels on a document, how do those two things interact? And a lot of times the people that are having to manage it are not the people that can manage how it works out when two different security policies are put onto a document. So we tend to try to lean away from that and use it only when it's required. Yeah. Okay, let's go. We talked about it a little bit. The next question, if your organization has or is moving to M365, do you think AI would create the most benefit? Where would you think AI would create the most benefit? Now, this is very similar to the previous conversation, the auto classification. Reorganization is another big one that came up. The one thing I will note here is that we very much have been talking about the reorganization in terms of everything. Obviously, when you're going to something like a SharePoint or M365, the architecture of your SharePoint sites is very much part of this conversation, not just the folder structure they're going into or what metadata are you putting on them or things like that. So we try to instill in people that when you're going to something like M365, managing the records is just as important as managing the architecture of M365, team sites, OneDrive. So I saw a little bit of that in the responses as well. But for the most part, again, back to the old adage you said earlier, garbage in, garbage out. How can we get the AI systems to help us have something a little bit cleaner coming at the other side? Any comments around that? I think we've already kind of touched on all those points.
Yeah, just to say that even though the responses in some cases said, look, we haven't talked about going to 365 yet, but my experience across the country right now, and limited amount of experience in the US because we don't really do much in the US, but across Canada, I'd say like I don't talk to people that aren't moving to SharePoint and 365. Like I really don't talk to people. I talk to people that have other systems like Laserfish and OpenText and Documentum and other solutions like that. And the comment that usually comes out is, but we're looking at using 365. We won't necessarily get rid of that other solution right away, but that's kind of the direction, long-term direction we're looking at going to. So Microsoft's already won the war as far as I'm concerned in my experience across the country. They may have lost a couple of battles temporarily because of timelines, but the war's done. So it'll be 365 coming up down the road for a whole lot of people.
Number 8 here, what areas do you think is the most helpful for you with the use of AI? It's kind of more of a general statement. Some people have actually managed the retrieval of records, which I thought was interesting in that obviously we have indexes and search engines, and this is going to become important as we, continue down the AI path. That the retrieval was kind of an interesting highlight for me. And most of the respondents are interested in understanding all uses of AI pertaining to their implementation, but there was no kind of, we talked about this earlier, the use cases that people are going to be looking to augment with these tools. I was hoping to have some feedback on that we didn't see much in terms of that, just the idea of classification and retrieval were the most benefit people were finding.
Yeah, the one thing I think I made note of in there on my notes, Troy, was that email keeps coming up as one of those things that people are really struggling with, and that whole idea of being able to do some kind of assistance with email and how do you classify it and what do you do with it? How is it dealt with? Because everybody's got millions of Outlook emails, exchange emails in their organizations now. And you know what? First question I ask everybody when I talk to them is, okay, senior management, they're still using Outlook, right? And they go, oh yeah, I can't get rid of that. That's what all the senior management people use. That's where all decisions are made in the organization, is in Outlook. So I mean, it's not going away anytime soon. So we just got to pay attention to how many millions and millions and millions of corporate records there are potentially in that Outlook and Exchange environment.
The one thing I will say that has been very helpful, let's talk about email specifically here, now, is the idea of the summary capability of these AI agents to take large bodies of text and ask it questions about that body of text, right? We I actually, with the new AI models and this whole 124K context window that we can put into it, giving it a question against like email threads. This email thread has been going on for 3 months, and I need to know the decision that was made about Daryl and the idea of migrating our email system to M365. Is somewhere in there is that answer, but at no point do we want to have, going back to upper management, reading 10,000 page emails trying to find that answer. And I feel like the AI systems are very good at doing that kind of. Now, how do we use that safely? I don't suggest copying and pasting a full email thread and pasting it into ChatGPT and asking it questions, but where can we get a tool in place that helps us summarize some of these large bodies of text for more useful information? With the new AI agent stuff that came out, like I mentioned earlier, I took a bunch of my email and put it into the agent and then tried to get it to query against my email history. Very good at that kind of stuff. And it will be coming, and I think that the Microsoft Copilot, I'm hoping will be good at this. I still have reservations on terms of the capabilities of what we're going to get out of a Microsoft product that are going to be useful for somebody like upper management asking questions. I think we're going to see a lot more generate me a slideshow kind of AI assistance more than we're going to see help me with the corporate decisions that I made 3 months ago somewhere in my email. But I do give a lot of credit to the generative AI stuff and the ability to do summaries on data, which I think could be very useful in a lot of cases.
So in the example that you just gave, would the AI crawl through your email to do the summary?
Yeah, so not to get too far down in the weeds, but essentially these AI agents allow individuals or organizations to create their own agent. Think of like a chatbot. Hey, here's the documentation for Agile IM. Answer questions about Agile IM for me. And I put that up on our site, and somebody can query just like our online help, but instead of our online help, you have this agent that already knows all that information. And
so it's not going back into the large language model.
No, you're feeding the document in terms of this. Now, the privacy concerns and stuff like this, I don't suggest it, and I was very particular in what I exported from my email to put into this, but that large body of text was very limiting before with the new GPT-4 Turbo and the 124. It's the equivalent of being able to upload 300 pages of a novel as part of your content. So here's 300 pages of my email over the past 3 years. Now answer my questions based off of this document, and it allows you to upload that information into your agent. It's going to be very helpful in terms of people. This kind of functionality already existed before, a little bit more cumbersome to use. They've been making it very user friendly to make your own agents. But again, these are just generative AI tools. They're not actually doing any work. It's not like, now write me the email to respond to this or perform this action for me. We need more of that. And again, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, how we're building Agile IM, how we're trying to work with clients to facilitate processes rather than just making decisions. So lots of cool stuff coming. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Number 9 here, would you like in-depth sessions in the new year on AI RIM? Please indicate. So just the questions of people, what they would like to see next. Auto classification was the big one that came up, and how we can kind of do that process in Agile IM or in records management. I will mention, I keep bringing up Agile IM because that's where I'm building a lot of our tools and doing a lot of our work. But that has been our focus, is not just so much, hey, here's a document, classify me for it, but all that other process around it. How can we flag things? How can we generate reports? How can we do disposition? How can we reorganize, actually put it into a different structure, not just make a decision on something? So that's definitely where our focus is, and where I see our next kind of sessions be around AI or just records management in general, is the processes we're doing, not just the records management.
Yeah, because when we talk to people, the things that keep coming up, like, okay, well, we're going to auto classify a document, can we also find out if it's got personal information at the same time?
Yeah.
Can we find out if it needs to be this, if it needs to be that, if it could do this, if it could, I mean, there's a lot of other things that people are thinking about in relation to just what else can I do while we're in there doing that job of auto classification. Like for instance, I run it, it does an auto classification, maybe it does an auto security classification at the same time. That I see that as a useful thing, right? Where it goes, okay, I've looked at the document now, and we should be security classifying this as whatever, based on the organization and how the organization works. At the same time, like I think that would be a useful kind of thing, because a lot of times when people go and move things, they do a lift and shift, right? They go take a shared drive and they just basically lift it and shift it over to SharePoint. Well, man, what a job of trying to figure out how the classifications, the security classifications correspond from a shared drive over to a SharePoint site. I mean, wow, what a huge undertaking that is to try and figure all that stuff out for IT. Well, maybe they don't care as much. I mean, necessarily they don't care, right? But it's true though that, and I thought about this a lot in terms of imaging projects. Like you go and scan something where you were safe as a church with your paper record, because there was a gatekeeper. Somebody was going to say whether you could have that paper or not, right? Somebody went, wait a second, you can't see that because it's a whatever kind of document. But once you get it over scanned and OCR'd, and it goes over somewhere into an electronic system, it doesn't have a gatekeeper anymore the same kind of way. So you have to kind of figure out when you scan something and you OCR it, what's it going to be from a security classification standpoint? Who's going to be able to see it? Who should be able to see it when it goes over to a SharePoint or a team site or wherever that thing's going to go? I mean, it's a huge, I think it's a huge issue, actually, personally, because nobody cares a lot of times when they go do a project like that. They'll go scan the stuff, and nobody thinks about it in a kind of an overarching kind of way of, okay, we scanned it, but should we actually let anybody see it once we scan it? Or who should see it, I guess, is more to the point.
Right, we're getting close to the end of the hour here. The last question was just kind of the general observations or anything we missed. To summarize this from the survey results, a lot of people are just looking for more information. And I hope this session kind of got you at least part way there. I will say that even from my own experience, working with this and doing this kind of work all the time, there is a lack of information out there in terms of what's possible, because a lot of people haven't even gotten there yet. There are tools, there are software tools, there's agents, there's chatbots, all that kind of stuff. But in terms of it actually being useful to people, we're still working through that. And I don't feel like people should feel like, hey, I tried to look up how do you do Purview AI agent in my SharePoint site to do process A. It's unfortunately just not there yet. There's a lot of people building these kinds of things. The use cases, as more relevant and more prevalent processes get built, we'll get more on top of that. But yeah, right now it is a lot of work. There is no magic to it. It is still just human level intelligence driven generative text that is the main AI out there. So hey, run my company is not the AI that we have yet. It's a lot of the stuff we talked about today, and how can we use that to facilitate what we're doing in our day-to-day jobs.
So no Star Wars yet, Troy.
No Star Wars yet. Yeah.
And on thinking about what is being put out there, for example, just this morning, OpenText sent out an AI thing, and usually when I see one of these things, I glom onto it. Like tomorrow, I got Gravity Union is doing something, so I was like, "Oh, OpenText is doing something. This has got to be something impressive." Well, they've got a list of what kind of things AI is going to be transforming, and records management is not on it.
Gee, Ken, what a surprise.
So what the heck? Are we not going to focus on artificial intelligence and records and information management? is not that where our industry is cross-hatching. So that's why I think what you've done this month is a very important first step
Thanks, Ken. We
towards
appreciate
all this
that.
stuff.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be able to do these sessions, and thanks, Ken, so much for coming on and being part of this with us. I really appreciate it. Not just because you're a friend, but also I appreciate your capabilities and your abilities in this area as well. After all the years we've done stuff together, so Troy, thanks for spending the time. I know you're busy and you got lots of things to do too, so really appreciate the time. Thanks everybody for coming on to the session today, and it's recorded, so at least we'll have these sessions for other people to be able to see. If you have people that you think should see these sessions, all 4 of them are recorded, and they will not be taken away anytime soon. We keep all our Learn With Us sessions up on the Western IM Learn With Us website component. So thanks again, everybody. Have a really great rest of your week, and thanks for attending.
Thanks, everybody. See you guys.
Bye now.
Yes, Joanne.